While you might think someone lacking the ability to smell, taste, see, and hear as a child would make it impossible for them to be educated, it turns out just such a person was actually the first deafblind person to be fully educated. The woman was Laura Bridgman. Bridgman was born in 1829, and it is thought that she had full use of all of her senses at birth. However, at the age of just 2 years old, she became sick with scarlet fever, which lasted several weeks before she began to get better. Incidentally, this same sickness took the lives of her 2 sisters and brother, adolescents in the 19th century, everybody. In any event, once she did heal, it became apparent that she had lost her sight and hearing in the process. It was later discovered, after she was educated, that she had lost or never had a sense of smell, and she also had nearly no sense of taste. The one sense she did have was touch. Amazingly, even with only this one sense and no real language, she was still pretty handy around the house as a child. She enjoyed mimicking actions demonstrated to her through touch, so her mother used this to teach her how to do certain household chores. She even learned to sew and knit in these early years. Beyond that, her only real methods of communication were a very simple form of tactile sign language. For instance, she knew if someone pushed her that she was to go away. If they pulled her, she was to follow along with the pull. When she did an action correctly, or did what her family wanted, they would pat her on the head. When she did something incorrectly, they would pat her on the back. Eventually, though, Bridgman became too much of a handful for her family, as she frequently threw violent temper tantrums and would only commonly obey her father, who had to physically overpower her to get that obedience. At this point, it was generally thought that a deafblind person would be unable to be taught even the most rudimentary things beyond mimicking tasks, let alone being able to be taught to comprehend language. Luckily for Bridgman, though, there was a school for the blind, which had been founded the same year as her birth, in 1829, and which opened in 1832. That's Perkins School for the Blind. By 1837, many blind people had been successfully educated, and one of the instructors there, Dr. Samuel Gridley Howe, learned of Laura Bridgman's condition through an account written by the head of the medical department at Dartmouth College, Dr. Mussey. Once he learned of Bridgman, he wanted to try and see if there was a way that he could find to teach a deafblind person language, which would hopefully be the vehicle to educating her. Laura, now 8 years old, was then sent to Perkins and began her education. Howe and his assistant, Lydia Hall Drew, first started by devising a way to teach her names of objects in English by giving her objects with their names attached to them in the form of labels with raised letters. Eventually, Laura was able to match labels to objects when the labels were detached. However, at this point, she still had no concept of what she was doing and was only imitating based on memorization, rather than really understanding what the labels meant. However, now that she had at least associated certain words with objects, even if she didn't understand the significance, Howe took the exercise further by cutting up the labels and teaching her to rearrange them into the words that she associated with objects. It was during these exercises that Bridgman finally grasped that objects have names and labels were indicating the names. This was first indicated by the fact that she very suddenly, independently wanted to know what the names of objects around her were. Shortly thereafter, she began to fully grasp the concept of an alphabet, and from there, they were able to teach her to use the alphabet and words in communicating. As for timetables, for example, Bridgman was first able to write her own name in a legible fashion on the 24th of July, 1839, about 2 years after her education began at the age of 10 years old. Her progression in mathematics was, in contrast, astoundingly fast in comparison to her education in language. For example, it took her just 19 days from her first maths lesson to learn to add columns of figures from 0 to 30. In any event, once she had learned language, the rest of her education was relatively straightforward. Her brain now had an engine to drive conscious thought, including essential abstract thought, which language is key for. She proceeded to attend classes like all other students at Perkins, though with various teachers, with her at all times fingerspelling everything to her. During her education, she learned mathematics, astronomy, writing, geometry, philosophy, history, biology, etc. Thanks to Howe being able to successfully reach Bridgman, and the fact that he'd been able to do it while she was still fairly young, which is key for proper brain development, and to allow her to be able to think abstractly once she had a language for her brain to use, there now was an established method for reaching deafblind people. Further, it was now proven that deafblind people are capable of learning just as well as anyone, assuming they were reached at a young enough age, which was contrary to what most thought at the time. Howe also published an account of Bridgman's education which drew the interest of Charles Dickens, who came to meet her when she was 12 in 1842. Dickens then wrote an account of Laura Bridgman in his work American Notes. blindness. In 1886, this account in Dickens's work resulted in Helen Keller's parents learning that a deafblind person could be educated. It was also through Howe's methods for teaching Bridgman that Keller herself was taught. As another fun fact related to Keller, the doll Anne Sullivan, the teacher of Helen Keller, gave Keller upon their first meeting, was made by Laura Bridgman and had been a gift from Bridgman to Sullivan. Interestingly, on this one, the first thing Anne Sullivan taught Keller was the word doll. You see, when she arrived in 1887 at the Kellers' home, she brought the doll for Helen. She then placed it in her one hand while tracing the letters of the word doll in Keller's other hand repeatedly. The learning process was exceptionally slow at first because, much like Bridgman, Keller didn't really understand things like objects having names and things like that. After around a month, however, when she realized that tracings on her hands were indicating the name of what was in her other hand, she, like Bridgman, suddenly wanted to know the names of everything around her. Going back to Bridgman at the age of 20, her education was complete and she returned home. However, because of neglect by her family, who didn't have time to properly look after her, she developed health problems and it was decided that she should return to Perkins permanently. Her former teacher, Howe, and a friend of hers, Dorothea Dix, set about raising funds to support Bridgman at the school. While there, she taught needlework and helped around the school with domestic chores. She also made money for herself by using her modest fame to help sell various needlework pieces that she did. That said, her primary use of the money tended to be in buying gifts for people she knew and donating to various charities. In Bridgman's free time, her main hobbies were reading and writing letters and poems. Her most famous poem, in her day, was Holy Home, which states in part, "I pass a dark home toward a light home above. Hard it is for us to appreciate the beauty of holy home because of blindness of our minds. By the finger of God, my eyes and my ears shall be opened. The string of my tongue will be loosened. With sweeter joy in holy home, I shall see and speak and hear. What rapturous joy I shall hear angels sing and play on instruments." Bridgman died in 1889 at the age of 59 in her sunny home at Perkins. And now for a bonus fact. Contrary to popular belief, Helen Keller was not born blind or deaf. Keller was born able to see and hear just fine and continued to be able to do so until she was about 1.5 years old. At that time, she became sick with some type of illness. What that particular illness was isn't entirely known. However, it's thought that it might have been scarlet fever or meningitis, with the symptoms being described as an acute congestion of the stomach and brain. Whatever the case, after she recovered her health, unfortunately, she now couldn't hear or see. Another common myth is that she had no way of communicating with her family until a teacher arrived around her 7th birthday. In fact, she had a very limited communication method involving about 60 home signs that she used, mostly in communicating with Martha Washington, who was the child of the Keller family's cook and was Keller's playmate. As alluded to, in 1886, when Keller was 6 years old, her mother read Charles Dickens's American Notes, which were accounts of his travels through North America in 1842. The particular bit of those writings that intrigued her was a part about Bridgman being successfully educated, something she had previously thought wouldn't be possible. She then sought to finding a teacher for her daughter. Her search eventually led to the famed inventor Alexander Graham Bell, who at the time was a teacher of deaf children. Incidentally, his wife and mother were both deaf. Bell then recommended Helen's parents to the Perkins Institute for the Blind in South Boston. Once there, a 20-year-old visually impaired woman by the name of Anne Sullivan was asked to become Keller's instructor and eventually governess and constant companion. Their relationship lasted in this way for nearly 50 years. Unlike Bridgman, Keller had rather more lucrative support outside her own endeavors, thanks to being good friends with Mark Twain, the two having originally met when she was 16. Twain played a key role in her life, among other things introducing her to Henry Huttleston Rogers, an extremely successful self-made businessman, making his millions when the oil industry began to boom. At the encouragement of Twain, Huttleston saw to it that Keller had plenty of money for her education, which allowed her to earn a Bachelor of Arts from Radcliffe, becoming the first deaf-blind person to earn a degree. He also gave her a monthly stipend throughout most of her life. In the end, despite being deaf and blind, Keller managed to learn to speak and could even read lips by touching people's lips as they spoke. She could also similarly read sign language with her hands, as well as use it to communicate with other deaf people. Her ability to speak particularly aided her, as she would frequently give various lectures and speeches as an adult. She also became an accomplished writer. And as a final fun Keller fact, at the age of 30, Keller's eyes were removed and replaced with glass eyeballs. The motivation behind this was primarily cosmetic and was at the encouragement of her family, as while one of her eyes looked normal, the other bulged out significantly, marring an otherwise reasonably attractive face. For this reason, most pictures of Keller before the operation were taken from the side, hiding her bulging eye. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.